I heard his laugh through the wall. I was standing in the green room, behind the main stage at the Meridian Conference Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was 22 minutes before I was due to walk out in front of 800 people, and that laugh came through the wall the way it always had, carrying, self-satisfied, designed to fill whatever space it entered and then keep going. I had not heard that sound in 4.5 years. I recognized it in under 2 seconds. I set down my water glass. I stood very still. I looked at myself in the long mirror above the credenza, and I held my own eyes for a moment and did not look away until the thing I felt, whatever it was, something between recognition and a low hum of resolve, had settled back into calm. 4 years. 4 years since Richard Crane had stood in front of 43 people on a video call and told them, told me, told anyone who happened to be watching their screens on a Tuesday afternoon in March in the 3rd week of a pandemic, that I lacked the leadership profile for senior work, and that I still have this written in the small notebook I kept, not someone this firm could build around. 4 years since I had picked up the cardboard box I had been sent home to fill, carried it out of my apartment building's lobby, and stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon light with the very specific expression of someone who has been publicly humiliated and is making a decision about what to do with their face. He was in the audience. I had known since breakfast. My assistant Priya had sent the attendee list at 7:58 that morning, and at the bottom of her message, written with the quiet efficiency that I had come to rely on, were the words, Row 4, Center Section, Name Badge Confirmed. I had read that line. I had set my phone face down on the breakfast table. I had finished my coffee. My name is Petra Hollis. I am 32 years old. On the 17th of October, 2024, I was the keynote speaker at the Meridian Strategy Summit, the largest annual conference in healthcare and operations strategy in the country. 812 registered delegates, 45 minutes on the main stage on the first morning of a 2-day event. Richard Crane, the man who had fired me in front of my entire department 4 years earlier, was in row 4 of the audience. What they did not know was that his laugh through that green room wall was the last thing they gave me before I walked onto that stage. This is that story. Before I take you back to the Tuesday afternoon that started all of it, I need to stop here with you for just a moment. If you are watching this and you have ever been in a room, a conference call, a performance review, a department meeting, where someone with authority used that authority to tell you what your ceiling was, you already understand something about what I carried when I walked out of that building in Atlanta in March of 2020. The green room detail I just gave you and the row 4 anchor, those are the bookends of 4 years of work. Subscribe if you haven't already, drop your location and the time where you are in the comments, let me know you're here. And then stay. Because what happened in that conference hall is worth every minute of the story that leads there. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia. Decatur is 10 miles east of Atlanta, close enough to the city that you grow up with the skyline as a reference point, but far enough that the neighborhood streets feel like neighborhoods, with yards and creeks and the particular August smell of cut grass baking in humidity. My father, Gerald Hollis, was a civil engineer for DeKalb County. He spent 30 years in that job, and he never talked about it as a career, in the way people talk about careers when they mean ambition. He talked about it as work, as something you showed up to prepared and did with attention to the parts that mattered, and without drama about the parts that didn't. My mother, Diane, taught 4th grade for 22 years at the same elementary school she had attended as a child in the same neighborhood, which she considered completely unremarkable, and which I have always found quietly extraordinary. Neither of them was the kind of person who made speeches about what hard work would earn you. They were the kind of people who showed up on time, fully prepared, and let the quality of what they produced carry the argument. I absorbed this without understanding I was absorbing it. I did not fully understand what I had been given until I needed it. I was not a natural student in the sense of things coming easily. I was a persistent student in the sense of working on things until they came. I studied business administration at Georgia State, graduated in May of 2014, and took a position as a junior analyst at a management consulting firm in Midtown Atlanta called Aldrin Partners. It was my second choice firm, and I knew it on the day I accepted, and I decided on that same day that the difference between a first choice placement and a second choice placement was entirely what you made of the opportunity once you were inside it. I believe that. I still believe it. Aldrin Partners was a mid-sized consultancy, maybe 60 people at full staff, focused on operational strategy in the healthcare and logistics sectors. It was unglamorous, detailed, repetitive work, and occasionally, when a project opened into something genuinely complex, it was interesting in a way that I found more satisfying than I had expected. My manager there, a woman named Carol Bassett, was direct and exacting in a way that I did not appreciate until I had spent 2 years being managed by someone who was neither. She told me at my 12-month review that I had the strongest instinct for pattern recognition she had seen in an analyst at my experience level in a decade. She said it the way she said everything, without theater, as a statement of observation rather than a compliment. I wrote it down in the notebook I kept for things I wanted to hold on to. I left Aldrin in the summer of 2016 for a senior analyst position at Crane & Merritt Consulting. The reasons I told myself at the time were the ones that made professional sense. The salary was 30% higher. The client portfolio was larger. The work was more complex. The honest reason, the one I understand better now, was that I was 24 years old and Aldrin's pace of advancement felt slower than my own, and I had not yet learned to distinguish between a firm that was moving too slowly and a firm that was moving at exactly the right pace for who you were still becoming. Crane & Merritt was a different kind of place. Richard Crane had founded it in 1999 with his college roommate, a man named David Merritt. David had left the firm in 2011. The company history described this as a mutual decision to pursue independent ventures. Everyone inside the firm, when Richard was not in the room, described it as David finally having enough. Richard was 51 when I joined. He had been told he was visionary by enough people who needed something from him that he had come to hold this as a fact about himself rather than an assessment, and he ran the firm accordingly, with the specific certainty of a man who had not, in a very long time, received information that contradicted what he believed about his own judgment. He was intelligent. He could be genuinely brilliant in a client room, the kind of brilliant that made people feel they were in the presence of someone who saw more than they did, which is a particular skill and a genuine one. He was also consistently, structurally unkind in the way of men who have never been required to account for their unkindness because their results provided continuous cover for it. I did not see this clearly at the start. I saw it clearly in stages. The first stage was my promotion in the spring of 2018. I had been working as a senior analyst for 2 years when the promotion to associate consultant came through. It came after a 6-month supply chain project for a regional hospital network in Tennessee, a project I had effectively led in the final 2 months after the assigned project lead stepped back due to a family medical crisis. I had not been given the lead role formally. No title change, no announcement, no acknowledgement. I had simply seen what the project needed and done it. Managed the client relationship, produced the deliverables, presented the final recommendations to the hospital's executive team. The client extended the engagement for a second phase and specifically requested my continued involvement. My promotion followed that extension. Richard Crane did not congratulate me. His assistant sent a standard email from a template. I noted this, I filed it, I said nothing about it to anyone. The second stage came that October. I had been an associate consultant for 6 months and I had been carrying a specific frustration for longer than that. The feeling of being used at full capacity and recognized at partial capacity, of leading project work that was being narrated by others when it reached the rooms that mattered. I had raised this in a performance conversation with Richard in October of 2018. I had prepared for that conversation. I had notes. I had specific examples I was ready to discuss clearly and without grievance. Richard listened, or performed the posture of listening, which is not the same thing, and told me that I had strong technical skills and should focus on deepening my delivery expertise before pursuing visibility at the senior level. He said this smoothly and quickly and moved the conversation forward without a follow-up question, in the way you speak to someone you are not fully present with. I left that meeting with a precise understanding that the concern I had raised had not been received and was not going to be. I went home and I made a decision. I decided to stay at the firm long enough to build a piece of work I could take with me. I knew what that piece of work was. I had been building it for months. The third stage was the proposal. I submitted it in November of 2018. I had spent 4 months building it. Not all at once, but in the hours before work and the evenings after it, and the Saturday mornings I spent at my kitchen table with my laptop and the research I had been accumulating from 18 months inside Crane & Merritt's hospital network engagements. The proposal was a 22-page document outlining a case for a new service line, a healthcare workforce optimization practice that I believed represented a genuine and documented gap in what the firm was offering its clients. I had a market sizing analysis. I had a competitive landscape review. I had a phased build plan with resource requirements and estimated timelines. I had a 3-year revenue projection built from the client data I had worked with directly. I had cited every source, timestamped every piece of analysis, and written it at the level I would have written a client deliverable rather than an internal suggestion. I submitted it to Richard through the formal proposal channel on a Monday in November. He acknowledged it the following week. He scheduled a meeting for December. The meeting was held on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of December, and it lasted 12 minutes. Richard told me the idea had genuine merit, but the timing was not right, given current resource allocation and the firm's near-term priorities. He said perhaps next year. He kept the proposal. He thanked me for the work. In January of 2019, Crane and Merritt sent an internal announcement to all staff. The announcement described the launch of a new workforce optimization practice targeting their healthcare sector clients. The initiative was described as stemming from Richard's strategic vision for the firm's next phase. The practice would be led by a senior director named Thomas Bale, who had joined the firm the previous November from a competitor consultancy. Thomas Bale's professional background, which I looked up once that evening and never looked up again, was primarily in financial services consulting. He had not worked on a healthcare client engagement in his documented career. I saved the announcement. I saved a time-stamped copy of the proposal I had submitted in November. I saved the notes I had written immediately following the December meeting, which I had dated and signed in the same notebook I used for everything else. I saved them in a folder on a personal hard drive that I kept at home. I had no plan for them at that moment. My father had taught me that documentation was not a sign of distrust. It was a sign of care. You kept records of things that mattered. These things mattered. I said nothing to Richard about the announcement. I went back to my projects. I delivered my work. I began, very quietly and with no urgency, to plan for the when of leaving, not the reaction of someone who had just been wronged, but the calculation of someone who had decided to leave on their own terms and was building toward the moment when those terms were ready. I was not angry in a way that interfered with the work. I was clear in a way that clarified what the work needed to be. The Tuesday afternoon in March came before my when was ready. It was the 17th of March, 2020. We were 8 days into the closure of offices, the nationwide restructuring of work, the professional world collectively and very rapidly learning what it meant to operate without physical proximity. Crane and Merritt had lost 2 client contracts in the preceding 10 days, both citing budget freezes, both effective immediately. The firm was under financial pressure in ways that, under different circumstances, I might have had some patience for. Richard was under personal pressure in ways that I noticed but did not, and do not now, offer as an explanation for what happened. He called a department meeting at 2 o'clock. 43 people on the video call, most of us on kitchen chairs in newly converted home offices, backgrounds showing whatever domestic reality had absorbed our professional lives in the preceding week. Richard spoke for 15 minutes about the current environment and what it would require of the firm. He was measured at the start. He talked about resource efficiency, about the need to evaluate team structure, and then, and I have turned this sequence over many times in the years since, looking for the logic that would make it make sense, and I have not found it. He called my name. He looked at the camera, he said my name, and then he told 43 people that my performance over the past quarter had fallen below what the firm required at my level. He said I lacked the leadership profile for senior work. He said I was not someone this firm could build around. He said my position was being eliminated effective immediately and that HR would follow up with the relevant documentation. 43 people on that call. My name, said out loud. My profile, assessed and found lacking, in front of every person in my professional life at that moment. The HR manager was already in a private message thread with me before Richard finished his last sentence. I received the termination document at 2:17. My laptop access was revoked at 2:22. I had exactly 8 minutes between being told, in front of my entire department, that I was not someone this firm could build around and being locked out of my work email. I did not cry on the call. My face was what I had decided my face was going to be, which was still. I sat at my kitchen table after the call, and the stillness held for a while. Not a performed stillness, but the actual quiet of someone absorbing something that has just become permanent. Then I opened my notebook. I wrote down what Richard had said, as exactly as I could reconstruct it. I wrote the date, the 17th of March, 2020. I wrote the time, 2:13 p.m. I wrote the number 43. I wrote the exact phrase, leadership profile. I wrote the exact phrase, not someone this firm could build around. Then I turned to a new page. At the top, I wrote 2 words. What now? If you are still here with me, and I can feel in the way of this kind of story that you are, I want you to do something before I tell you what came next. Comment below right now. Tell me you have had a Tuesday afternoon in March, somewhere in your own professional history. Tell me the word yes, or your industry, or your city, or just that you're still watching. The women who find this channel are not here for entertainment. They are here because they have their own version of this story, and they want to know what happens in the years after the worst moment of it. Subscribe if you haven't already. I will be right here. Now let me tell you about the 4 years I built after that afternoon, and what I was carrying when I walked out of the green room onto that stage. The severance was 8 weeks. I used every day of it with the specific and focused energy of someone who has just had the last of their reasons for patience removed by someone else's hand. The first call I made was to Carol Bassett at Aldrin Partners. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened, calmly and in order, without editorializing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do next?" I said I wanted to build something of my own. She said, "Then build it. Call me when you have the shape of it." She said it the same way she had said everything at Aldrin, directly, without theater, as though the outcome she described was already a reasonable expectation rather than an aspiration. I said I would call. I meant it. I spent the following 3 weeks taking the 22-page proposal I had submitted in November of 2018 and expanding it into a full business plan for an independent consultancy, not a scaled-down version of Crane & Merritt. Something built from the ground up on the specific gap I had documented, healthcare workforce optimization, grounded in a methodology I had developed across 18 months of fieldwork inside real hospital network engagements. I named it Hollis Strategy Group. I registered it as a limited liability company in the state of Georgia on the 14th of April, 2020, 3 weeks and 4 days after my termination. The early months were hard in the way that beginnings are always hard. Not dramatic hardship, not suffering, but the flat, unromantic weight of building something from nothing during a period when the entire healthcare sector was simultaneously in crisis-level operational demand and complete budget paralysis. The two conditions did not cancel each other out. They just existed at the same time, which meant that every organization that needed what I was offering also had 17 competing priorities and a freeze on outside spending. I could not get a client meeting in April. I got 2 exploratory calls in May, both of which ended with the words "We'll revisit this in Q3. In June I got 1 engagement. A regional hospital network in Alabama had found me through a former Crane & Merritt colleague who had moved there the previous year and who remembered my work on the Tennessee project specifically enough to recommend me. The engagement was a 3-month workforce strategy assessment. It paid $42,000. I delivered the entire thing alone, every document, every client call, every presentation. The COO at the Alabama network, a woman named Margaret Yates, was direct and exacting and thorough in a way I recognized from working with Carol Bassett, and I found I liked it enormously. She extended the engagement for a second phase before the first phase was complete. She referred me to 2 contacts at other systems before the extension had started. I worked from home for 14 months, not by preference, but by economics. I was paying myself a salary 20% below what I had made at Crane & Merritt, and I was tracking that gap as a number I was running toward rather than lamenting. I leased my first real office space in June of 2021. A single room in a co-working building in Midtown Atlanta, unremarkable and sufficient. That month I also hired my first contractor. His name was James. He had been laid off from a larger consultancy in the spring of 2020 and had been working freelance since. He was meticulous, curious, and had a particular talent for translating raw workforce data into narratives that clients could act on. I paid him by project, and I treated him with the specific attention of someone who understood from the inside what it felt like to be underutilized by a structure that could not see you clearly. By the end of 2021, Hollis Strategy Group had 4 active clients, 2 retainer relationships, and revenue just under $300,000. I was 29 years old. I paid my building's co-working membership every month, and I noted the distance between where I was and where I was going as something measurable rather than daunting. There was one moment in the autumn of that year that I think about when people ask about the difficult parts. I had been in conversation for 4 months with a large hospital system in the Southeast, a major health network with 7 facilities, exactly the kind of engagement that would have accelerated everything. We had had 2 exploratory sessions. The relationship felt solid. They were serious and I was serious, and the scope of the work was clear. In late October of 2021, they sent me an email to say they were canceling the exploratory engagement due to internal restructuring. The email was polite and completely impersonal, and it said nothing that was specific to me or to the work we had discussed. I read that email at 6:45 in the morning at my kitchen table. I sat with it for a while. Then I went to my desk, and at 7 o'clock I opened the list I kept of organizations I had been meaning to contact, and I called the next name on it. Not because I felt fine. Not because I was not disappointed, but because the work was the work and the work did not pause for the things that interrupted it, and I had decided, somewhere in the first year, that I was going to keep building, regardless of whether any given moment felt like the right conditions for building. The right conditions were the ones I made. In the spring of 2022, something shifted. I had begun writing. Not for marketing, not strategically, but because I was generating more insight inside my client engagements than I could contain in the deliverable documents, and the insight was about a specific and genuinely under-examined problem in the healthcare sector: the way organizations systematically underutilize the analytical capacity of their mid-level talent, how this shows up in workforce data years before leadership recognizes it, and what it costs them when they finally do. I published the first piece on LinkedIn on a Tuesday in March of 2022. It was 400 words. Within 1 week, it had been shared by 3 healthcare executives, cited in an industry newsletter, and had generated 11 inbound messages from hospital systems I had no existing relationship with. I published a second piece in April, a third in May. By June, I had been invited to speak at a regional healthcare leadership conference in Charlotte, a half-day event, 200 attendees, my first speaking invitation. I was afraid in the practical and specific way you are afraid of things you have not done before. I prepared for 3 weeks. I delivered the talk without visible fear and received 3 client inquiries before I reached my car in the parking structure. The speaking grew. The writing grew. By the spring of 2023, I had a body of work that existed independently of the client engagements. A perspective on healthcare workforce strategy that was specific, documented, and grounded in 4 years of fieldwork. I was being asked to speak at events I had not applied to. I was being introduced at conferences as an expert in a field that I had once written a 22-page proposal about to a man who had kept it and called it his vision. In September of 2023, I received an email from Carla Oduya, the programming director of the Meridian Strategy Summit, asking if I would be available to deliver the opening keynote at the following year's conference. The Meridian Summit was the largest annual event in my sector. 800 delegates, 2 days, main stage keynote on the first morning. I read Carla's email twice. I replied within the hour. I said I would be honored. I did not tell anyone about it for 3 weeks. I sat with it first. I let it be real before I made it social. I worked on the talk over the following 7 months, not in continuous blocks, but with the steady attention of someone who knows that the talk is just the place where the work becomes visible, and that the work itself has to be right. I knew what I wanted to say. I had been saying it, in various forms, for 2 years. The summit gave me the scale and the architecture to say it completely. The morning of Thursday, the 17th of October, 2024, I was eating breakfast in my hotel room 3 floors above the Meridian Conference Center, when Priya sent me the full attendee list at 7:58. I scrolled through it with the low-grade attention of someone scanning for familiar names without expecting to find any. 400 names into a spreadsheet of 812, I stopped scrolling. Crane, Richard. Crane and Merritt Consulting. Principal. I sat with that for a moment. I set my phone on the table. I looked out the window at Atlanta in the early morning. The skyline I had grown up alongside, the city I had been fired in, the same city I had rebuilt in, the morning light coming flat and pale across the glass towers. Then I picked up my phone and sent Priya a message. Row 4, center section confirmed. Her reply came in under 4 minutes, confirmed. Badge scanned at registration at 7:14 a.m. Do you need anything? I sent back. No, thank you. I want to be honest about what I felt at that moment, because I think it matters. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel anger. The anger had burned off years earlier, somewhere in the first winter of building the business, when I realized with complete clarity that I could not hold the anger and build at the same time, and I had chosen building. What I felt when I read Priya's message was smaller and quieter than any of the things I might have expected to feel. I felt a kind of clarity. The clarity of someone who has been working toward a thing for a long time and can see, finally and without doubt, that the work was enough, that it had always been going to be enough. I finished my breakfast. I went down to the conference center. I spent 40 minutes in the green room with my notes, and then I set the notes aside because I did not need them. I knew what I was going to say. At 9:43, a green room assistant opened the door and said they were ready for me. I stood up. I left my water glass on the credenza. I straightened my jacket. I walked to the stage entrance. The house lights dimmed. Carla Oduya walked to the podium and introduced me. She said the summit's theme this year was operational leadership in complex systems. She said the keynote speaker had built one of the most respected boutique strategy consultancies in the healthcare sector over the preceding 4 years, that she had been published in 3 industry journals, that she had spoken at more than 20 conferences in the past 2 years, and that she had been named by Healthcare Operations Quarterly as one of the 35 people under 35 reshaping how hospital systems think about workforce strategy. She said it was her great pleasure to introduce the founder and principal of Hollis Strategy Group. She said my name. 812 people applauded. The stage lights came up full. I walked out. I did not look for Richard immediately. I let the room settle. I stood at the center of the stage, and I looked out at 800 faces, and I felt, not for the first time, but perhaps most completely for the first time, that I was exactly where the work had been pointing all along. The room was the size and quality it was, because of 4 years of work. Everything in it, the delegates, the stage, the light, Carla's introduction, the applause, was the direct output of the work. Nothing in it was given or unearned. I took a breath. I let that be true. I found Richard at the 90-second mark. Row 4, center section, 12 seats in from the left aisle, sitting between 2 colleagues I did not recognize. He had aged in the specific way of men who spent years running on the energy of certainty, a little heavier in the face, a little less sharp at the edges, the particular settled quality of someone whose forward momentum had slowed in ways he had not fully accounted for. He was looking at me with an expression I had seen before on other people in other rooms, the expression of a man doing a very fast and not entirely comfortable calculation. I held his eye for exactly 2 seconds, not with heat, not with performance, not with any of the things I might have imagined doing if I had spent time imagining this, which I had not. 2 seconds of plain, level recognition. Then I looked back at the 800 people in the room and I began to speak. I said, I want to start this morning by talking about what happens in organizations when the wrong people are put in the wrong rooms. Not the wrong roles, the wrong rooms. When a person whose instincts are correct is placed inside a structure that has no mechanism for accounting for those instincts. When the pattern recognition lives in one place and the authority lives somewhere else. When the people closest to the problem are the furthest from the decision. This is not an accident of organizational life. It is a design, and it is a design that healthcare systems are paying for every single day in ways that show up in their workforce data long before they show up in their leadership conversations. The room went still in the way rooms go still when something private is being said out loud. I spoke for 43 minutes. I had planned 45 and landed at 43, which Carol Bassett had once told me was the mark of a presenter who knew the material rather than the script. I talked about workforce optimization frameworks I had developed across 4 years of client engagements. I talked about the specific documented failure modes of top-down leadership structures in healthcare systems under resource pressure. I talked about the real cost, measured in dollars, in turnover rates, in patient outcomes, of organizations that consistently underutilize the analytical capacity of the people in the middle of their structures. I talked about what fixing it looked like in practice, with specific examples drawn from 4 years of fieldwork. I did not look at Richard Crane again until the 41st minute. It was not a decision. I simply did not need to. I was speaking to 800 people who had registered for this conference because they wanted to hear something true about the work they were doing. And I was saying it, and Richard Crane was one of 812 people in a room that had been assembled for the purpose of hearing me speak. That was all he was. At the 41st minute, I reached the section of the talk I had been building for 15 minutes, and I looked at him because I wanted to see his face when I said it. I said, "The most expensive thing a leadership team can do is tell someone what they are not someone. The most expensive thing a leadership team can do is believe themselves when they say it, because the person they told is still working. They took that information and they left with it, and they went somewhere else. And the work they were going to do for that organization, the work that was already inside them, already built, already ready, they are doing it now. They are doing it somewhere else, just not for you." The room did not immediately applaud. Something happened before applause. The intake of breath, the small collective shift in how people were sitting in their chairs, the quality of a room that has heard itself named. Richard Crane was very still in row 4. I finished the talk, I thanked the room, I walked off the stage. The standing ovation began in the front rows and moved backward through the hall in under 4 seconds. Priya told me this afterward because she had timed it. In the green room, she handed me a water glass without speaking for a moment, and then she said, "That was the best one." I said, "Thank you." I sat down. I did not attend the cocktail reception. It had been on my schedule. I had been planning to go. At 4 o'clock, I sent Carla a message asking her forgiveness for the early departure, and I meant it genuinely. She had given me something significant, and I was grateful. But I was done for the day. Not tired in a depleted sense. Done in the sense of someone who has completed a thing and knows it and does not need another social event to confirm it. I had dinner alone at a restaurant in Decatur that I had known since I was 23, a small Italian place near the house I grew up in. I ordered what I always ordered there. I sat at a corner table. I did not check my phone. At 11:47 that evening, my phone showed a new email notification. The sender was Richard Crane. The email was 6 sentences. He said he had been in the room at the summit and that my talk had been impressive. He said Hollis Strategy Group had clearly built something significant. He said he had always believed in my potential, and that the period during which the firm had to make difficult choices had been hard for everyone. He said he hoped we might find time to catch up, given our shared background in the industry. He signed it Richard. I read it once. I put my phone down. I went to sleep. I did not reply, not because I was angry with him. I was not, and had not been for a long time, not because he did not deserve a response, but because the response had already been delivered. 43 minutes of it to 812 people, in the city we had both worked in the industry I had built myself back into from a cardboard box and a Tuesday afternoon, and a notebook page that said, "What now?" In the months that followed the summit, the inbound inquiry volume at Hollis Strategy Group increased by 60%. I signed 4 new clients in the 4th quarter of 2024. In November, I promoted James from contractor to full-time senior analyst. A conversation that was among the most satisfying of that year, watching him receive it with the particular composure of someone who had been working toward something they believed in without knowing when it would arrive. In December, I hired a second research analyst. By the end of the year, I had a team of 7, revenue just under $1.2 million. And a speaking calendar for 2025 that required a dedicated coordinator to manage, because Priya was doing everything else and could not do that too. I turned 32 in February of 2025. I had a birthday dinner in my apartment, the apartment I had bought in the spring of 2023 with the proceeds of the first 2 years of the firm, in Midtown Atlanta, 4 floors above the street. I used to walk to a co-working desk with a laptop bag and an 8-week severance, and a very precise idea of what I had been told I was. 8 people came: Priya, James, Carol Bassett, who drove up from Decatur without being asked twice, 3 friends from different chapters of my life, who had watched the building years from their own vantage points, and Margaret Yates from the Alabama Hospital Network, who had over 4 years become something closer to a colleague than a client, and who sat at the end of the table and ate her pasta, with the particular contentment of someone who had bet early and been right. We ate and talked until well past midnight. At one point someone asked me whether I had always known it would turn out like this. I thought about it before I answered. I said, no. I said I had known what the work needed to be, and I had done the work, and this was what the work looked like from a distance. That is the true answer. Not the inspiring one, perhaps. Not the version of the story where I made a plan on the day I was fired and executed it with perfect certainty. The true version is that I did not know it would work out. I did not know the keynote invitation was coming, or the growth in 2024, or any specific outcome beyond the one I could see immediately in front of me. What I knew was that I would keep working. Those are not the same thing, and I think the distinction matters more than we usually say it does. What I know now, sitting in an office I lease in Midtown Atlanta that I pay for with revenue from clients who sought me out, is this. Richard Crane was not entirely wrong about me on that Tuesday afternoon in March. I did lack the leadership profile for senior work at Crane and Merritt Consulting. What he could not see, and what I only partially understood at the time myself, was that the profile I lacked at his firm was the one his firm required of anyone who stayed. It was the profile of someone who needed his approval to do the work, his visibility in the room to feel authorized, his confirmation of the ceiling before accepting it. I had never had that profile. I do not have it now. The firm I built does not require it of anyone who works within it. He told 43 people I was not someone the firm could build around. He was right. I am not someone any firm builds around. I am someone who builds the firm. To anyone watching who has been in a room, a conference call, a performance review, a department meeting, where someone with authority used their authority to declare your ceiling, I want to ask you one thing. Not what did you do after, not how did you survive it, not whether you got your moment on the stage or the email or the standing ovation. I want to ask you about the first page, the page you turn to in whatever you write in when things matter, that same evening, or the next morning, or whenever the stillness settled enough that you could hold a pen. The quiet page after the worst moment. The page where you wrote down what came next, or what you wanted to come next, or just the honest question of what now. Because that page is where it began. Not the anger, not the humiliation, not the 4 years, or the revenue, or the moment in row 4. The page. What did you write on yours?